Good evening. Welcome to this Prosperity Scrutiny Committee. Just got a quick notice to read out. This is a meeting of the Council held in public. It is not a public meeting. There is no fire drill planned, so if a fire alarm sounds, please leave by the exit nearest the large screen at the front of the room and proceed down the fire exit to the courtyard. Once it is safe to return, councillors will receive a text message. Officers will also advise when it is safe to return to the meeting. We're also recording the meeting this evening using our webcasting system. The webcast will be transmitted live and will also be available on the Council's website following the meeting. All mobile devices should be switched off or set to silent so that the meeting is not interrupted by ringtones. Okay, thank you. First, can we have apologies for absence, please?
Yes, apologies have been received from Councillor Holliman and Councillor Kieran Easton, and Councillor Harrison is substituting.
Thank you very much. Any declarations of interest? No. Okay, just moving on to the minutes. Is it agreeable for those who were here last time that they're an accurate record of the previous meeting? All those for? Or against? Abstentions? Thank you. Okay, item number 4, Q4 overview report. If I can hand over to officers to begin.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Christine and I are going to do a double act on this. I think it kicks off with me and then over to Christine. The first item you'll see on there is an update on South Essex Advanced Technical Skills, which, if members remember, is the joint project between South Essex councils to try and drive up demand for degree apprenticeships, so to grow a technical university in South Essex. Recent developments have resulted in the appointment of a managing director and a business development manager, which has predominantly been funded by contributions from the Thames Freeport. So they're now in and they're working in our offices. So that project is moving forward quite well, and the plan is next year, as part of the South Essex Council's work, to ramp up that delivery and, as I said, try and grow the overall degree apprenticeship market in South Essex. The second report on economic development, including UK Shared Prosperity Fund, just simply reports about where we are in our economic development strategy work. After some discussions at Greater Essex and South Essex, it's clear that the Greater Essex upper tier local authorities have been asked by central government to produce an economic development strategy by September, October this year. And that is true for pretty much every upper tier local authority who's taken on the responsibility for local enterprise partnership activities. So in tandem with that, South Essex has just commissioned some consultants which will be developing its South Essex plan, which is going to align to about the same time. So we've just decided in the last month or so that we'll try and produce a economic strategy to align with those three as well, to get an integrated suite of strategies. So that's really just what that one is reporting. In terms of other exceptions that I'm just reporting on, the BBG, Basildon Business Group, Capacity Development and Build, earlier this week we held a launch of the business network, which is a rebrand, which is now called Basildon Business Leaders, and we're very much trying to grow the capacity of the private sector to take on ownership of running that business group and leading the development of that business group. And we had about 60 people who came to an event with the Bank of England and Thames Industry Growth Board, so it was a very successful event. So that's going in the right kind of direction. Wickford Business Improvement District and Billericay Business Improvement District is a substantive item on the agenda, so I'll pick that up there if everybody's okay with that. And just in terms of other UK Shared Prosperity Fund, activity, all in delivery, heading in the right direction. Probably should say we're looking for some more feasibility studies, so we're going to issue a call for more funding for projects. So far we've funded a feasibility work into Wickford FC's 3G pitch, some walking and cycling infrastructure, and we're also in discussion with somebody who wants to set up a pop-up retail operation. So again, if you're aware of anybody that has got sort of projects that they want to check out the feasibility for to see whether they can bid for larger money, we got little bits of money to support those kind of projects. So I'm going to stop there and hand over to Christine, if that's all right.
Thank you very much. We start again with the strategic infrastructure and planning enforcement, Councillor Moore. The first one of those relates to obviously the local plan. The update from that and the exception is the fact that on the 12th of March we did in fact respond to the Secretary of State, and we have reviewed our local development scheme, which is the timeline for the new local plan. That seeks a draft plan for consultation by winter 2024, submission plan for consultation at spring 2025, and submission of the local plan as required by central government by summer 2025. So therefore, we meet the requirements under the current 2004 regulations. So there'll be examination in public, we reckon, around autumn 2025. Recommendations from the inspector around spring 26, and the new local plan adopted, we hope, around summer 2026. So we've brought the whole programme forward by about 18 months. So that's quite an added piece of work to the service, but obviously we can manage that. In terms of other exceptions, there isn't much else we get to until we get to the Creative Centre for Screen and Digital Industries. Over to you, Jim.
Yeah, just to report that members may remember that we have secured £4,500 from the Arts Council to invest in the Old Robin Cinema and the British Heart Foundation, and we sought an operator to run that facility for us, a managed workspace operator. And we went out to the market and we got 10 responses. We shortlisted 4, and then in the final phases of that selection process, the 3 of the 4 withdrew, predominantly because they had lots of other work on, and we were left with one single operator. We got into the final discussions with them, and they effectively told us that despite us advertising the opportunity as being outside the 1954 Landlord and Tenant Act, they wanted to be inside the Act. So at that point, the negotiation ended because we couldn't change the procurement arrangements that we'd gone out, and indeed we won't subsequently change the procurement arrangements to be any different than we originally went out. So last week we went out again for an operator, and we're just in the process of warming the market and trying to encourage some people to submit proposals. We've got a virtual briefing with some of those operators on Friday morning, I think with a deadline of the 22nd of March for them to submit their proposals. And then effectively what we're seeking to do is to try and bring back the decision about the operator to the June cabinet meeting, with a view to then, if we're successful in appointing them, continuing the capital build programme and opening the facility in about August 2026. And so everything else is on track in that regard.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Oh, please.
So moving on from there is no other exceptions on the report from my side until we get to the only one exception is, and that's the project title Langdon Public Realm. I think it's a bit of good news is the fact that we are now in active discussions with Sanctuary Housing over the redevelopment now of the Langdon scheme. So obviously we can move that piece of public realm work into those discussions we're having on that at the moment. So that's a good news story, I think, for us all. We finally get that project moving again. Back to you, sir, I think. Oh, no, it's not. No, I think that's it, actually. The last one is just the Pitsea CDC, which we're all aware has planning permission now. 106 is just about to be signed, so the planning consent is almost granted for that. So that's the sort of the exceptions from our side.
Please.
I was wondering, with regards to the proprietors that would want to work on the Robin Cinema, about how many have we got this time around on the?
Because the closing date hasn't landed yet, the number is 0 because on the 22nd of March will be the time when we know how many have submitted. So we have not received any proposals yet because we only went out last week. But I think at the as of close of play today, I think we have about 5 or 6 operators coming to the briefing session on Friday morning. And then they will have the remainder of the time between Friday and the 22nd in order to prepare their proposals and submit them. But we're aiming again for, I'd say, a good place to be would be around about 6 to 8 operators, I think.
Okay. So the aim of having those operators is to work on the building and also to run the centre.
More to run the centre. So separately, we will go out for a design and build operator in order to do the capital works to the building. But this is principally more the person who's going to run it. And the reason the person to run it is front loaded is because we actually want them to help us actually finalise the design of the building. So we're at REBA stage 2 at the moment, and we've paused all other design work pending the appointment of the operator, because having the operator help us design in REBA stage 3 will mean that it's more suited to the end user, and the operator gets the kind of configuration that they want in order to make it a viable facility for them.
Ask. So what's the main criteria for approvals?
So I'd need to refresh my memory about the evaluation criteria to give you a really accurate, detailed answer. But what predominantly we built the evaluation framework around is to try and score people higher who principally look like they have a more viable, sustainable, long-term business model that doesn't necessarily impact on our capital situation or our revenue situation after the first couple of years of operating. So we might in principle be open to providing a small grant during the first couple of years. You'd expect in this kind of situation you might give an operator a rent-free period or something like that. But after that, we very much want the operator to be a sustainable, viable operator. So whatever revenue they make from selling space and using that facility covers all of their costs, pays their business rates, and avoids the council needing to continue to support them with some form of subsidy.
I know you spoke about sanctuary housing. There's that project, but there's another project by Church Road, another housing build that's happening at the top of Church Road in St Martin's. Would you know about that one?
No, I don't. I'm not sure which one.
Just at the top of Church Road.
Is it the Sempre Housing Scheme on Broadmain? It's just got the hoardings round it at the moment.
Yes, yes.
That's a Sempre Housing Scheme.
Okay, so could I ask, because residents wanted to know this, that residents were opposed to the build, but what led to the approval? Would you know what led to the approval of that piece of land? At this,
and the matter came to planning committee. It was a major application. It was a council scheme. It had to come to planning committee. So the decision was made by planning committee to grant planning permission subject to signing a 106 agreement. The 106 agreement's been signed, planning permission's been granted, and they're about to commence on site.
I mean, yeah. So the views of the residents weren't taken into consideration, or was it?
If you look at the reports that are done for planning committee, they set out the number of objections that we have, or sometimes people actually speak in favour of the development. They're set out in the report, and there's a balanced report delivered that sets out any challenges were to the application. They're all set out in the report, so we don't ignore the comments of residents. They're included in the planning report. And members who sit on planning committee have chance to review the planning report, have chance to ask additional questions, and residents can turn up at planning committee and make their views known. Now, I think at that one there weren't any residents that turned up, And if they did write in, they'd have been made aware of the planning committee, and they could have come to planning committee and made their position known to planning committee at the time.
I think what might be important for any follow-up is to take it offline if you want to go into any more detail. Please, Councillor Harrison.
Thanks, Chair. Just around the local plan changes that you mentioned, Christine, the bringing it forward by 18 months, the final deadline. What will there be any financial savings in bringing it forward 18 months, or will there be any changes at all with that? And then also sort of on the practical point of view, sort of what steps will be getting missed out to bring it forward by so much, and if they are able to be, there clearly has been scope to bring it forward. So for Amy, why was it such a long process in the first place if we could have brought it forward by 18 months?
Firstly, it's obviously pressure to deliver plans on time, and we have been put under that pressure by central government now, and all local authorities have been written to requiring them to update their local development schemes. Our local development scheme gave us the opportunity to sort of spread the regulations stages over a longer period of time. And also the way that we are looking at delivering this new local plan is the fact that what's called the Reg 18 draft plan, which is the first plan that we'll be producing, will be mainly what's called an allocations plan with some very high strategic policies. So it will be a plan that will set out the allocations, the future sites, residential and employment sites. So that will come very quickly as we hit the new the June, obviously following the elections. Once we very quickly get obviously committees up and running, we'll be then hitting members with a lot of information around housing numbers, and obviously looking at allocations. We're coming forward at that point. The way that the plan, that the government's changing the way that you do, that you create plans, there's not so much in terms of additional policy. So a lot of the policies are what are called strategic policies. A lot of the lower level policies are going to come out as national development control standards. So a lot of the more interesting stuff that we talk about planning committee will actually be part of national guidance soon. So like the MPPF, there'll be some additional guidance on development control matters, which will still be relevant in decision making, but we don't have to write those policies ourselves. So there's less and less requirement to go into policy details. So our plan is that we produce the Reg 18 plan as we had planned to do. So that would have been that was tracked about the same, but underneath it we will start working on the final submission document almost at the same time. So so when we've done the consultation on the Reg 18, the two should actually hit, allowing us almost to go straight back into a consultation on what's called the Reg 19, the submission document. So it's what we've done is we've actually moved. The longer bit, which we're doing now, we've kept the same, but we've actually shunted back because of the policy changes. We've shunted back the amount of time it's going to take us to produce the Reg 19 plan. So that's what we've done, is we've shortened that period. We hope we can deliver it in that time. We need a local plan. We need a plan that sets out allocations and sites. So I think that I can't guarantee it will be a cheaper plan, because obviously we've got to reprofile the same amount of work, but under a short period. But hopefully it might be a cheaper plan to deliver. But it is going to be a lot of work, and a lot of work for members, because members are going to have to get on board very quickly. Once we hit that June date, on being prepared to, we need members to sit in working groups to work on sites and work on housing numbers and everything really quickly and understand that. And then there'll be work with all members to make sure members all agree with it. And then obviously the consultation will start hopefully in November of that plan itself.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Hopefully we'll have an administration by then that's keen to get moving on it. And then just around Langdon that you mentioned as well. Obviously it's in my ward, and I get residents asking me about it all the time, as I'm sure all the Lee Chapel and Langdon councillors do. I mean, I remember a few months ago there was a sort of a photo shoot with officers and councillors of like, we're getting started on it, and then nothing's happened since. I mean, is there do we know when they're actually going to make a start, and how long it's going to take, and what's the reason why there's currently still nothing happening, even though we were told months ago that it would be starting.
So, Councillor Harrison, I have a meeting tomorrow morning actually on site with them to start. Basically, what we're looking at now is a new section 73, a variation of the original planning commission, as you now know, because you're in the planning committee. We're looking at a variation of visual planning application, because obviously some of the build that was on site they've had to change because of the changes in the type of buildings that we need. So we've got our first site walk tomorrow to look at the site itself. And then we've got a design session with Sanctuary and their architects tomorrow. So it's ramping up into a pre-app planning performance agreement position onto hopefully an application, we hope late summer. So once that's approved, then obviously you'll be looking at construction starting probably, I reckon, this time next year, hopefully, if we can get it all moving, maybe a bit later. But I think within about 12 to 15 months, we're going to start seeing some changes there. And obviously the starting point, we've had some pre-app meetings with them already, and we've got one on site tomorrow morning, which is all morning. We're out there, so it doesn't rain, looking at the site. Because that's the problem with the site, there's so many different site levels, aren't you? You can't do it over, we tried to do it over a Teams meeting and I got a bit lost. So I said, no, I need to go out on site, I need to do this in real terms. So I think what we can do is that I think that as a standing item on the overview going forward might be quite important just to see where we are. And obviously what we can do at some point, we'll hopefully be able to do some show and tell around what's happening as well.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I hope that does get moving. And you say that they're hoping to start within sort of 12 to 15 months. I mean, do you have a rough idea of when it'll be actually finished, how long they'll take to actually build the thing?
No.
Okay, no, that's everything I had, Chair. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor. It's also worth pointing out why we ended up in this position, which was sort of the previous administrations before we came in 2021, the sort of hatchet job they made of it. But I don't want to go over the past, looking towards the future. But just picking up on something you said, Jim, particularly on the cycling and walking projects, you're saying about advertising it. I think what might be a good point is to use our sort of council email list that gives updates of what would residents think would be helpful. Obviously, as a Wickford resident, I've got some interesting things about what I particularly like with cycling, but it's obviously just trying to engage with people, particularly the county council, because in Wickford, which I'm sure Christine will know, we had the active travel forum, which made some changes to sort of parts of Nevendon. And it's obviously if there's stuff that can link in with that, because there's already a sort of standing committee, we can sort of go through that, but just some feedback on that.
Yeah, I mean, just to say in the context of that particular project, obviously it was part of a funding package that was funded by UK Shared Prosperity Funding. Tom Oliver, thank you, our cycling and walking infrastructure lead, has been very active working with Christine and with the county and with parishes and town councils on looking at what the LC WIP and the walking infrastructure and cycling infrastructure should look like as a solution. And really the feasibility money is then just about trying to do some calculations about what that might cost to bring forward. So I'm not sure, I think the normal process and the channel for residents in order to comment was the normal consultation and strategy development work. All the UK SBF feasibility money did was put a little bit of money into the system in order to bring in some consultants to work out what the cost of making that or bringing forward that work would be. So in that scenario, I'm not sure I've got a great deal that I could do in terms of engaging with residents, because it was quite a technical piece of work, if you know what I mean. But certainly Tom, I'm sure, you know, and through the planning work and the LC WIP has done lots of resident engagement work.
It's just been out for consultation. The whole document has been out for consultation, and we made members aware of that consultation, and residents were. So that was on the website for the whole local cycling walking infrastructure update. So that's been done. That has just closed. I'm not sure how many responses, and there were quite a few workshops with relevant cycling and walking organisations. And basically the money that the Prosperity Fund has gone to fund is the fact that planning funded the initial work itself, and then and there was some money we got from county towards that, and this is basically just working out how much it costs to put in the individual routes in terms of just the overall costings. And then what we then do is that we then seek that funding either from central government or from new developments that are coming forward.
Yeah, thanks for that. A lot of it as well is we've got quite a lot of public rights of way, particularly in my ward. I've taken a trip round and sometimes get lost and make sure I have to stay on the trail. If no one has any further questions, I hope to move to item number 5, which is South Essex Council's SEC Superfast Digital. Over to you.
Brilliant, thank you. So just whilst colleagues are bringing up the presentation, I just wanted to say there are some technical points in this presentation which I will freely put my hand up and say I'm probably not the best person to answer them, but I can certainly take them away and liaise with the team who've been behind the infrastructure build. My role, I guess, in this piece of work now, the infrastructure has been established, is to really think about how do we utilise that for the benefit of the borough, both in terms of digital exclusion, for improving residents' ability to use digital technologies to improve their skills and to get access to services, but also from an economic development perspective. So I'll walk through this presentation and, as I said, talk to you about some of the technical build stuff, but I feel more able to answer some of your questions about how we might then really realise some of the benefits of this infrastructure. So just in terms of the first slide and giving you a bit of a story about how we got here, basically since about 2018, South Essex councils have been working together in order to identify a range of different funds that have kind of followed reasonably sequentially to build a backbone fibre network across South Essex that essentially connects up a range of public sector buildings and therefore allows us to, in theory, provide good quality internet to those buildings, but also look at how we might improve the quality of public services using digital infrastructure and fibre and mobile communications. At the same time, that infrastructure build has enabled us to put a backbone infrastructure in the ground, which has also improved connectivity to the business community and to residents, which makes them get faster internet, which allows them to do a load of things that they previously couldn't do on legacy infrastructure. And that's really the point we're at now. So all this first slide does is talks a little bit about the different funding packages which have come together, including the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, South East LEP and the Department for Transport, who've all in various sequences funded bits of this as it's expanded out and reached out into more and more communities. If I can go on to the second slide, what this second slide really does is gives you an overview from a South Essex perspective about where that kind of fibre backbone infrastructure is and where it goes to. And as I said, the predominant focus has been about really just trying to connect up sites and points of presence where you've got public sector buildings. The nuance between the two colours is just a simple build programme. Whoever designed this map, the first bit, the blue bit came first and then the red bit came second, so they decided to illustrate it in that way. But it just goes to show you that there's good coverage across Basildon and good coverage across South Essex. If I can go on the next slide. This then zooms in a bit more detail into Basildon town centre, and again, this largely describes the kind of backbone infrastructure. What the operators of this infrastructure have done since this diagram has been built is, if you look at where the industrial estates are on the north of that map, just south of the A127, they've also fibred up all of that industrial estate, thereby connecting those businesses to a much more resilient and high-speed broadband network that then feeds into the red and blue bits so that they can get really good connectivity. So one of the advantages for lots of the businesses in the area, they can get better broadband connectivity. If I can move on to the next slide. And then that just again shows you where the backbone infrastructure in Wickford is. And I'd love to be able to tell you why certain trajectories and paths were chosen. I suspect it's the weird anomalies of picking up public sector buildings along a path and a journey in a way that you've got land ownership and the way you can get way leaves and where you can actually go without necessarily having to get permissions from private sector landowners. But again, that just gives you a flavour for Wickford. If I can move on to the next slide. And again, this shows you, therefore, from a public sector perspective, which the predominant buildings are that have been enabled. So again, you know, I would expect most of you to be able to recognise some of the buildings in your own wards in some of those sites. And as I say, that list was developed by the team pulling it together. If there are others, then you know that we think we should be thinking about, we can certainly feed that into the process. If I can move on to the next slide. And then this then talks about some of the other connected sites in Basildon, so Langdon Community Centre and Shopgate Community Hall. And it talks a little bit there about how that's been funded and what the annualised cost is for providing a really good quality internet service to those facilities, but with a vision here about, again, around the digital inclusion piece of thinking about, are there things that we can do in those village halls that you know, might, for example, put a training room on the end of that and start, you know, delivering training to, you know, people who maybe are struggling to deal with internet banking, you know, people in their senior years who are struggling with internet banking, or people who are digitally excluded because they haven't got access to the right kind of technology and kit. So there are things that we can start to do in some of these buildings about really kind of empowering and addressing kind of digital inclusion. And then there's some other sites there that are added in, including library sites, fire stations and medical practices, which might allow for telehealth and telecare related services and things like that. If I can move on to the next slide, this sort of summarises some of the benefits. I mean, I think, you know, it's fair to say that it's unlikely that this infrastructure would have been built without it. You know, it would not have been built without public sector intervention. It needed it in order to prime the investment, to make the business case stack up. But the potential here, as I say, is to improve connectivity to a range of residents between different local authorities, to business parks, and then start to look at the kind of services that we might run over this infrastructure. But at the same time, to enable connectivity through that infrastructure in such a way that if the commercial model works and builds and builds and builds, it creates a sinking fund, which then allows the network to be expanded further and further and further as the people who are using the network grows. And that's really important, particularly around places where you've got quite significant not spots or really poor broadband connectivity, which you generally tend to find in rural areas, because it's not viable to take broadband often to rural areas. So the model here is about trying to see whether, to some extent, we can improve the connectivity into those areas that have particularly poor broadband and wireless networks. Next slide, if I can take that on. And then just in terms of some of the other benefits, it talks about, you know, attracting new business-to-business services into the area and leveraging, you know, the infrastructure to improve the quality of mobile masts, so improving 5G access. I know when I talk to people, when you drive down Billericay High Street, that you drop out, the mobile signal just drops out like that. I'm sure we've all had that experience, and this may allow us to improve some of that connectivity as well. The other thing, that the latest development is this thing called the LoRaWAN, which is a wireless network, a low power wireless network, which will allow you know, people with mobile phones to do a lot more sophisticated stuff on their mobile phones that they wouldn't have been able to do without this kind of technology in place. So again, we can start looking at some of the ways in which that technology can be used, both to service better public services, but also to work with the private sector to help them develop new applications, grow their businesses and create more jobs. And then the last one around the bottom is an example in Thurrock where they're using it to support sheltered accommodation, looking at how they can deliver remote healthcare and virtual lessons and courses delivered by South Essex College to kind of improve the living experiences of people who are living in sheltered accommodation. A couple more slides, I think, and then this is the bit that we're really thinking about now. Having built the network, What we are now trying to do is to, as an economic development function across South Essex, is really to promote the availability of this network to the business community. I was at a business meeting in December where somebody ironically put their hand up and said one of their biggest frustrations is their poor broadband connection in Basildon, and I was able to introduce them to a local company which is called Arc Systems, which is just next to Festival Leisure, which is one of the commercial retailers that sells space on this network. So they were able to talk with this company and improve their broadband connectivity, and therefore the company was able to do things that they were not able to do previously. So we've got a big job to do to try and market it and promote this network. If I can go to the next slide. The company that built the network has its own plans. It launched the network on the 22nd of January. It's expensed a bus that it's bought itself, and its plan is to tour this bus around South Essex. So if you see faster fibre connectivity in Britain, we're speeding things up on the side of a bus, you'll know that's the bus that is promoting this network. They're also talking about launch events, and there's a big business expo in Brentwood tomorrow with about 1,000 visitors, and they're going to be there promoting this network. So very much trying to get businesses connected up to it. If I can go to the last, I think, couple of slides. What we also now need to do is to really think about how can this network be leveraged, basically to deliver better kind of economic, but also social benefits and environmental benefits for the benefit of Basildon and South Essex. And there are a number of ways that we can do that. One of them could be around developing use cases, project ideas. So, for example, that enabled care home example that I cited in Thurrock, if we've got some ideas about how we think broadband connectivity might be able to improve the lives of residents, then we can start to develop some use cases and some business cases and try and seek funding in order to bring those projects forward. You know, the other thing that we can be doing, and we should be doing, is thinking probably about how we can collaborate with the private sector on some of this stuff as well, in the sense that, if I give you an example, I'm aware of a project that worked in another place in the UK where a number of local authorities came together and put all of their data into a big data warehouse, and then said to the development community, people who develop mobile applications and IT solutions, will make this data available for you, and you can use it to develop new applications that will help create cutting-edge technological solutions, and you hope that those companies then grow, develop, create jobs, and so on and so forth. So by collaborating in that way with the public sector in a kind of test bed model and what they call a living lab, you have the ability to kind of collaborate with the private sector to try and create economic growth in the area. So that's really where we are at the moment, is really thinking about how can this technology really be leveraged to create better quality jobs, to help the companies that are here grow, develop, use this technology better, but also how might it help us deliver more innovative public services in a challenging financial environment. I think that is everything, I think, from me, if that's all right, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Very good presentation. However, my ignorance is going to show because I'm going to be asking some simple questions. I only know internet providers, sort of home broadband and how you get that. What's it going to plug into the infrastructure you built, and do you have to pay whoever you plug it into, if that makes sense? And does that incur an ongoing cost to the council? Building the infrastructure and then getting people, I get that idea, and that you build it and you innovate and you provide innovation, but I just wondered about plugging it in. And then the second question that came to mind was, is this a real need? Because all the people around there, I'm just wondering, could they have just phoned up Virgin or O2 or whoever it is and asked them to install a full fibre connection? So are we providing anything new and innovative? And about the ongoing cost, and whether it's and then risk. What happens if it goes down? Is the council at risk for any profits lost?
Brilliant, thank you. In terms of the first question, that is quite a technical question. In relation to the cost issue, whether it costs us to connect to the worldwide internet. I'm not best placed to answer that. What I do know is that this network is effectively called backhaul, so it connects into the global fibre system, this is a resilient network built by a company with a long track record of building similar networks around the country. So I can't answer the question about the cost of connecting into the backhaul, but I can tell you that effectively, yes, it does. It does enable connection into global networks in order to allow communication around the world. The issue around the second question in relation to is it a market need, I think I described an example of a company that was in Basildon that was reporting that they were having problems in terms of getting good, solid connectivity. And part of the challenge, I think, is that the world is moving at such a pace that we're becoming a very data-rich community. And, if you look at things like augmented reality and virtual reality, it requires very data-hungry infrastructure. So, what this has done is build a network that allows that kind of traffic to be to travel on it. And to answer your last question in terms of the model, the advantage of the model that I think we built here in a kind of public-private partnership is that it does ultimately allow and enable reinvestment in the network that will potentially gives us at the level of our place a stake in the future of the network. Whereas sometimes, you're right, whilst there are other operators that are out there, they tend to not have place top of mind. So their reinvestment models are sometimes focused more on other places than they might be on Basildon. So the advantage, I think, around this approach to the delivery of infrastructure of this nature is it is exactly as you say, much more scalable, much more resilient, and much more capable of adapting and developing in its investment model than perhaps some of the more kind of national models.
Okay, because you've described the fact that the infrastructure has been rolled out. So what we're looking at, so it's rolled out, so are we looking at further rolling out anything more? And then are we looking, because I want to understand what the project is. Is the project raising awareness? Is that what it is, and why is it taking, aren't there channels for raising that awareness so that businesses can readily connect into that infrastructure?
Yeah, I think that yes, there is a job to be done in terms of raising awareness, and the advantage, as I said, of the way that this model has been built is that the more commercial traffic that rides on it, we've created a reinvestment vehicle in such a way which enables the money to be ploughed back into the network to make it grow and develop as more traffic joins it. The critical point, I think, in that regard is that I wouldn't necessarily. I think our marketing has to be quite targeted around some key development opportunities and key development areas. Geographically, I wouldn't necessarily go to large swathes of the resident population and say there's this new network here. I think the industrial estates are particularly a strong opportunity because they're quite data hungry. They also operate in quite an expensive leased line market, so the price that businesses often pay to get their broadband connection is comparably higher than you might pay if you were an individual resident. So there are opportunities there to help businesses reduce their costs and improve their connectivity that will make them more efficient. I think the answer to your last question in terms of it's gone. I can't remember what your third question was. It was there a minute ago. I think it was about what's the opportunity. That's right. I think the other thing is that how do we encourage and support and help people to take advantage of what I would call the end of pipe technologies that help them do things better, faster, and different. So if you take, for example, augmented reality and virtual reality, we were at an event last week as part of the Creative Tech Festival, where somebody was demonstrating that a car company had built a virtual car where you could effectively imagine how you could personalize that car. You could have a different color, you could have different seating, you could have a different configuration of the interior, and so on and so forth. And that's probably quite a common experience if you go and buy a car now, that they've built kind of virtual models so that you can select it in and see it and imagine it in its reality. But that's quite a data heavy and quite a hungry functionality. Could small businesses in Basildon, for example, be using similar technologies if they're doing interior design, or if they're doing stuff around training, for example? There's lots of people now who are doing training using virtual reality and augmented reality. Instead of needing to create complex and hazardous environments, you can do it with kind of goggles on and haptic gloves. So how do we encourage the businesses that are on the cutting edge of doing some of that stuff to come here and to start using those technologies in order to win customers and grow their business? I think that's really where the big opportunity is.
I'm just trying to tie this down. So we've got this opportunity. Is it something that the council is implementing, or is it Essex County Council? And what is the activity? What's the action what are we doing, and what's the action plan, or do we have timescales or an implementation plan?
Yeah, so across South Essex councils, the councils have been predominantly responsible for securing the funding in order to prime and build the network. They've then subsequently put the tender to build the network out for a procurement in the normal way that they do a procurement, and then a company has come in to build the network. So in reality, the network has been built by a third-party commercial professional firm, but the nature of the commercial relationship with that firm has been defined by the council. And in terms of the development plan and the delivery plan, we're just going through at the moment some work both on the economic development side and on the digital IT build side, where we are developing the implementation plan for the next phase of the development. The infrastructure people, the technologists, will be thinking about how can we continue to build the infrastructure to continue to provide better services and better reach, and so on and so forth. On the economic development side, we are structuring a project which is very much around how do we use this infrastructure in order to enable business growth, in order to enable job creation, and how do we help businesses reduce their cost and improve their productivity. There is a massive amount of stuff going on, I think, around, for example, smart factories and digital manufacturing, what's called Industry 4.0. How can manufacturers take paper out of their production system so that everything is digitized? I'm working with 2 or 3 companies who are doing that at the moment, and there are quite a significant amount of grants out there that will enable them to do that. So we're introducing them to those grants, helping them use that money to make a more digital manufacturing system, and then to some extent their product becomes cheaper and more cost effective to make because they've not got so much bureaucracy and paperwork, and therefore they can compete better on a global scale because they're using digital technologies better than their competitors.
Okay, so now we've got all that. We've got an implementation plan. My concern is that with technology, it becomes obsolete quite quickly. If we're not, it seems as if we have this infrastructure that's not being taken advantage of, and by the time we get to start taking advantage of it, things would have moved on. And so, what's the strategy to make sure that this can be done in a timely manner?
So I think you're right. If you look at the presentation, the current commercial relationship with this company lasts for 15 years. So we have a 15-year window within the current commercial arrangement with this company to exploit it and grow it and develop it and extend it. And clearly through that 15-year process, we'll need to reconfigure and rethink about how, in the next phase of the development beyond the 15 years, how that relationship works. Well, I think you're right. I think technology is incredibly fast in terms of its life cycles, and you're right. If you stand still, then I think there is a very real danger that somebody will come along and introduce something else that supersedes it. I think the really positive thing, at the moment is, this project's been working, as you can see from the dates, since 2018, 2019, and it's still been able to maintain a very kind of cutting edge system, a very cutting edge place in the market, more than perhaps some of the existing infrastructure providers have been able to do. And that's largely around the competencies of the people who've come together to build it, which is the partnership between the public and the private sector. But I think you're right. You've got to keep moving in that world. You can't stand still for any period of time.
My final question has to do with costs. Because how is it a project where we're expecting to get earn an income from, earn profit from, or is it a project that what's the financial strategy around
So
this?
I think the overall financial strategy is more focused on creating a sinking fund in order to continue to improve the use and the application of the infrastructure to deliver better economic, social, environmental outcomes for the residents of South Essex. In saying that, what I'm kind of trying to make clear is that I wouldn't expect to see a balance sheet in 1 or 2 years' time that says, and we've got an income stream as a council because we've got this infrastructure. I don't think there is. I don't want to make you think that we're making money off this. It's more about building the highways of the future in order to make sure that we can continue to make sure that people are not excluded from the digital world and so on and so forth. What I think is really interesting is that there is quite a significant amount of money, research money out there. And I was looking today at, let me give you an example. Oxfordshire County Council used to have this function within their council, which is called the Innovation Hub. And over about a period of 10 years, they drew in about £100 million worth of investment into public services by collaborating with the private sector. That kind of investment comes from people like UK Research and Innovation, Innovate UK, and Horizon Europe, which is, these are the kind of funders of this kind of digital innovation work. And effectively, what you can do if you've got this infrastructure is then start to identify areas where you think you can improve service delivery through digital by design, a digital by design mentality, pull this money in, and then see whether you can improve the quality of public services but drive down cost by using the external funding to prime innovation, if that's clear. And that's really where I think we need to get as a group of councils. We've not, I don't think, necessarily done a lot of that work, but there is evidence of people who are doing that very well in other places in the country. I think we have the potential. There's nothing to stop us from drawing on that kind of money to start to really continue to put investment into things that, if you excuse the metaphor, sit at the end of the pipe, not just about building the pipe. It's what are we doing with this at the to make people's lives better, which I think is more interesting.
Thank you. Very in-depth questioning there. So I'll sort of cut down what I planned on saying, which was I'm very big supporter of this being rolled out on our industrial estates. And I'll particularly point out that in Wickford it's sort of gone the wrong way. It could head towards our sort of Shotgate industrial estate and make sure they're supported down there. Because obviously sort of small businesses that may need better connectivity. And one of the big things for me is import and export, which the government's quite keen on. And maybe with the government's change to corporation tax, which is the investment in sort of capital, that may be slightly more helpful. Just on one quick point, if there's sort of suggestions for new routes and businesses that may want some, say like the industrial estate I mentioned in Wickford, is there sort of the feedback process available to bring that down or shift where it goes?
Yeah, I mean, to give you some sort of faith and hope about the Wickford situation, you can run spurs off this backbone. This is really, this is a bit like the national motorway network, and you can run A roads off this. So there's nothing necessarily inhibiting this network extending to Shopgate Industrial Estate in Wickford. It just has taken the backbone route that it has, a bit like you decide why you're going to put HS2 or why you're going to put the motorways where it has. So it's not a problem. I think you can, it's solvable for the Shopgate issue. And I think, yeah, in terms of, ideas and opportunities, there's a gentleman who project manages the infrastructure bill called Michael Snaith. He's very good. If you want to send me an emails, I'll happily make an introduction, and he's very open to having conversations with anybody about how the thing works. He's very, very knowledgeable about infrastructure, and you get him on any other subject, he'll tell you all about infrastructure as well. So yeah, he's good.
Thank you for that, Jim. Is there any further questions on wastewater?
Do you have one? I thought, you really shouldn't, but I couldn't help I really need to. On the obsolete point, hasn't technology already moved past joining to a hard-baked full fibre network? Isn't it really about broadcasting 5G and even now with Starlink satellite connection to the internet?
I'd answer by saying my level of understanding of that is that the answer is yes in part, but I still think you need a fibre backbone in order to transmit the backhaul. So, the story in here about being able to improve 5G connectivity across the whole of the region, it still requires this kind of backhaul. And, the LoRaWAN network clearly, is an example of where we're running with the support of the Department for Transport, running a low-power wireless network that enables connectivity across the region, but it still needs that backhaul in order to get it around the globe.
Thank you for that. It's also, I always remember that, particularly with Wi-Fi, there can be some loss, as opposed to Ethernet, which directly runs into the computer. And if you're sitting by a sort of metal pole, good luck getting a good Wi-Fi signal. I have that sometimes as well. So if everyone's happy with that, I'll move to the next report, which is Billericay and Wickford Business Improvement Bid Update. Over to you, Jim.
Brilliant, thank you. I'll try and keep this simpler and tighter. So members will be aware that, again, through part of our UK shared prosperity funding, the money that government gave Basildon to replace European funding, we had to write a prospectus with a group of partners about where we would spend approximately £1.27 million worth of funding over 3 years. And one of the things that the partners identified through the course of developing that prospectus is that town centres were in need of some investment, and they were minded to ask us what we might do in order to improve the kind of investment potential of particularly 3 of our larger town centres, Billericay, Wickford and Basildon. We focus predominantly on those larger ones because the recognised kind of convention of trying to get investment into your town centres is a business improvement district. They're quite common. It's quite a well-recognised mechanism. It's a global mechanism for trying to improve the commitment of the business community in an area to work together, but also then to leverage in some funding in order to support that investment. The more you get into smaller town centres, Leyden, Pitsea, it becomes harder because you don't have the critical mass of businesses, and you don't therefore have the community that's large enough in order to do something. So what we, if I can move to the next slide, what I intend to try and cover off today is a little bit about what a business improvement district is, our approach to developing business improvement districts, and then give you a little bit of an update in terms of where we are in Billericay and where we are in Wickford, and then just to give you an example of what the financial implications are for local businesses from business improvement districts, and then a little bit about next steps. And the thing that I would just ask you to note is that we're working with two different consultants in Billericay and Wickford. So there isn't a complete consistency about the way data and images are presented here, because it's taken from the work of the consultants and then shown back to you. So if you think something looks different for some reason, it's no other reason than there's just different styles of different consultants. If I can move to the next slide. So that map on the right-hand side shows you where all of the business improvement districts are around the country. You can see there's quite a significant number, and I've missed off the two that are in the Shetland Isles, and that predominantly just shows you where they are in the British Isles. The way they basically work is they ask the business community to come together as a community in order to decide what is important to them about the future of their town centre. And you form a group of people called a town team, and that town team largely comprises probably 8 or 12 is a good decision-making size. The sooner you get bigger than that, it becomes slightly more complex in terms of decision-making. What you clearly want to do on that town team is to have representation from the county council, from the borough council, and from the town council, so that the public sector is all aligned and supportive of the work. And then you try and grow the capacity of the business community to say what's important to them. You research it, you talk to them, you work with them to try and assess whether they are committed to the place and whether they are willing to invest time, effort and money in trying to improve that place. And you go through a process called a feasibility study, and once you've finished a feasibility study, if it says yes, there could be some potential to develop a business improvement district, you then develop a business plan. And once you've developed the business plan, all the time working with the business community, you then put that business plan to a ballot, and the business community then gets an opportunity to vote on that business plan. And if you get enough votes, the principle of the vote is that essentially you're asking the business community to vote for a small percentage increase in their business rates, which then gets pooled into a pot, and that community of business people then creates a mechanism through which they can then spend that money on improving the town centre. So it's a very democratic process, but it's a process that's also predicated on, to some extent, the public sector leading that build process, trying to grow the capacity and the propensity of the business community to work together, and then getting them to form a mechanism, and then to some extent falling into a kind of observer situation and hoping that they step up and they lead this process. So that's how the process works. The final bullet point on the slide, which says bid levies are basically hypothecated and devolved funding. What that means is that they are ring-fenced for town improvement activity. If one thinks about things like council tax, and one thinks about things like corporation tax and VAT, they are unhypothecated funding. They go into a big pot somewhere. Where they get spent is not up to you, it's up to somebody else sitting somewhere else in Whitehall. This money is essentially solely focused and can solely be invested in town centre improvement. And it's led by the business community in terms of, if the ballot is successful, they're the ones who decide where that goes. We sit at their shoulder and say, well, you might want to do that, you might want to think about this, we're doing this, you know, go here, and so on and so forth. But the important thing is, for lots of business people, it's hypothecated funding, so it in theory should be going towards improving their bottom line and helping them make more money. That's really what you're trying to do with the money. If I can move to the next slide. So we chose to do Billericay first, Wickford second, and Basildon third. The reasons for doing that are principally that Billericay has a really strong self-identity. It has a group of people who are from Billericay who are have a really strong belief in the value of Billericay, and it has a very strong social fabric and a strong level of community cohesion. That was demonstrated by when we asked the question and said, what do you want to do? Everybody go, oh, Billericay, we love Billericay, let's do this, let's do this. So it showed that there's a lot of enthusiasm and passion. I think the other thing is that if you look at some of the data, Billericay, according to some work that Essex County Council did with a company called OSCI, as much as we like to think it's an affluent place, it's actually the sixth urban conurbation in the whole of Essex with the highest level of community need. It doesn't have an education facility on its high street. It doesn't have a lot of green space on its high street. It doesn't have a cultural centre on its high street. So there's lots of evidence that there's quite a high amount of community needs in Billericay. We went to Wickford second, and but pretty much it's caught up, and so I can come on and talk about that. The issue around Basildon as a place to develop a business improvement district is that a business improvement district requires a really strong symbiotic relationship between the private sector and the public sector. And in reality, the past trajectory of where Basildon has been over the last 2 or 3 years has meant that the relationships have not been as strong as we needed between the public and private sector in order to make a business improvement district work. I would say very positively that is changing, and that there are really positive green shoots of recovery, whereby we're starting to have some really positive conversations with the development community. And so going to Basildon third and waiting for things just to settle down after a number of planning disputes has been a very sensible and I think wise decision. In terms of the other points on this slide, I've said different levels of community cohesion. We've sought to get a strong town centre public sector alignment with 1 or 2 public sector reps and trying to build the business commitment and also build wider business ambassadors in the town. So people don't necessarily need to sit on the town team, but if they're pro-bid and they like the idea, we need to keep them as a positive force, and we need to try and get as many people into that box of being a positive force and a positive energy rather than a negative force and a negative energy. And then the goal here is to create business groups and forums and companies in each of the towns that are leading the thinking about how do we create more footfall, how do we get more people spending more time in the town centre, how do we get more people spending more money in the town centre and things like that. And the process generally takes about 12 to 24 months to build a business improvement district. If I go to the next slide, in terms of the Billericay process, the feasibility study has reported. As I said, it broadly has indicated that there is the potential to get a business improvement district away in the town centre. There appears to be a lot of positive support for improving the town centre. People are very committed to the town centre. It's got quite a professional culture, lots of professional service companies that are prepared to invest time and effort. And the town team has now grown to a level where we've got the manager of Waitrose on it, who's been a chairman of 2 business improvement districts, in St Albans and Saffron Walden. So he's got understanding. We've got some of the major businesses from Bradford Way Industrial Estate on there. So, there's some good quality businesses there, and there's about 10 or 12 private sector people who are committed and really keen. So, the town team has now agreed to set up a private limited company as the Billericay bid proposer. So they then write to the council and say, we would like you to hold a ballot on our behalf. We then appoint, or we choose to run it in-house, somebody to run the ballot on behalf of the council. It runs exactly like a local election or a referendum, but the voters are the business community. The business community get sent a business plan and they're asked, do you want these benefits that come to you? And if you do, it's going to cost you this much in terms of your business rates, or it's not going to cost you anything at all, because there are thresholds where certain people under a threshold don't pay anything, and the business plan sets out what the percentage increase that they would likely pay. Then we write to the Secretary of State and say we'd like to hold a ballot, and then the ballot happens, and then we find whether the business community have voted or not. You may remember that Brentwood recently went through this process and voted yes, and they now have a business improvement district in Brentwood. There's one in Southend, and there are others around Essex. So, they're starting to build the capacity of the businesses in those towns to work together and kind of create an investment model that is predicated on those businesses putting a little bit of money in themselves in order to make that work. If I could move to the next slide. The area that you can see for the Billericay Business Improvement District is shown in that map, and it covers the High Street, as you'd expect, and it covers Radford Way Industrial Estate, so it's a two-part business improvement district. And effectively, the issues that the business community have told us that they consider to be important, that they'd like to see improved about their town, are issues around access, and that includes things like improving parking and improving the connectivity between Radford Way. Some of the businesses are saying that actually they go to Stock when they have a business visitor for lunch because it's easier to park in Stock than it is to take their business visitors into Billericay. So we're losing some trade. If we could solve that problem, you get more commercial activity happening. Issues around growth, tackling vacant units, creating more pop-up, more small businesses, and things like that. Events with an emphasis on community and family. So how do we bring more footfall? How do we get more cash over the tills? And then streets, things that we're obviously doing, but pushing beyond that. How can we improve the cleansing, the rubbish collection, the pavements, and the greening and the town centres? How do we make it a more attractive place? So that's where Billericay is. If I can move to the next slide, there's the ballot timetable. So essentially, the proposal here is to start and initiate a ballot after the local elections. So it didn't make sense necessarily to go before the local elections and overly politicise something which is largely a democratic process that the businesses get a chance to vote on. And the principle is that, according to this timeline, we will pretty much know in early August whether the ballot has been successful and the business improvement district has been successful. If I very then quickly move to Wickford and give you a very quick summary, and then I'll finish on a financial slide. We've got a different set of consultants in Wickford who are working on the same process. And again, if you look at the member representation, we've got Councillor Ball from County, Councillor Brockman from Borough and from Town. Don's been very helpful, Councillor Morris, sorry, I should say, in supporting this process and has been actively involved in it. And also, we've had Councillor Bradley from the Town Council. And we have been working very hard to get the business community involved. We just appointed the chairman, which is a guy who runs a very successful shop called the Geek Garage in Wickford. And then we've got other people from restaurants and various other businesses, Debut Academy, involved in the town team as well. So we're moving forward around broadly the same process. If I can move to the next slide, you'll see this is the area that's being focused on, and it again is predominantly, mostly the sort of high street area and those kind of surrounds. Again, issues around access, marketing and events to bring more footfall in, to get more cash through the tills. Crime and antisocial behaviour is an area where Wickford businesses have said they'd like more focus on, and also improving the general area. And that's the feedback from the consultation with all the businesses. If I can move to the last couple of slides, a same ballot timetable. Sorry, that's a bit small, but the ballot date would then be July 2024. So again, early August, we'd know whether whether Wickford businesses had voted for this or not. And the very last slide, I think, if I'm right, is just to give you some financial implications, because I think there is in some quarters, I think, a concern that business improvement districts place more financial pressure on businesses who are already struggling to keep their head above water. What I would say is that the way the levy works, the bid levy works, is you, as part of your business plan, you publish what your plan is in terms of that increased percentage. So how much increased percentage would a particular business, would every business need to pay? And you also set a threshold, and the threshold is normally at a level where, which is consistent with small business rates relief. So if you set the level at the threshold of small business rates relief, which is 12.5k, anybody under that anyway is getting rates relief anyway, business rates relief, and it generally means that there's lots of stuff like advertising, signage and things like that that also is rateable. So they're very difficult to contact. So you set a threshold where you take a large section of the people out, and then you publish that in your business plan. And I'm just giving you an example here in terms of Wickford. as a rough estimate in Wickford, if the bid and the ballot is successful, top 10 highest levy payers generally contribute around 20% of the levy pot. They tend to be more institutional investors or large national retailers. And I've said here that, having done some wet finger calculations, the top 40 retailers contribute around 50% of the pot, or the top 40 businesses, I should say, contribute around 40% of the pot. And then in that 40 in Wickford, there are about 8 local independents, but the rest of the businesses are national chains or significant institutional investors. So if we're worried about essentially transferring more cost to small businesses, you can see from this that most of the cost is carried by more of the larger national and institutional investors. And then lastly, in terms of the level of increase, if I look at all of those people who would be charged, in theory, if the bid is successful, the lowest increase would be about £60 a year, which if you work that out at 365 days a year is a few pence, or even 52 weeks a year, it's £1 or £1.10 probably a week that the individual business is being charged, with the average being about £300. But the critical point is that money goes back into a pot, and that the town team decides how they can use that money to improve the nature of the town team. And then lastly, bid levies are a separate levy to bills and rates. So technically it isn't an increase in business rates. It's actually a separate levy. I know that's a technical argument, but if anybody ever says to you, this is an increase in business rates, you go, well, actually not, it's a separate levy. Thank you very much. I hope that describes a little bit about how that process works. Happy to take any other questions. The next steps are just around, we've got to, keep the community positive on this and get them, behind it, and we develop the business plans, and then we, as a council, check the business plans, and then we go to ballot and hope that they get behind it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very good presentation. I have 2 questions. The first one's about the scheduling, and how you've decided to go Billericay, Wickford, and then Basildon, and it seems to be based on a principle of low-hanging fruit, effective, because you will have people who are interested. Where it seems to me that the greatest need is actually that those are the very reasons why you should have done it the other way around, because low business engagement, etc., are exactly the higher fruits that we need to be aiming for. So that's the first thing. So it's really worrying to me that there was no presentation on the Basildon part of it. There was only Billericay and Wickford, which means to me, and I don't know if I'm correct in thinking this, that there isn't a consultant working on the Basildon one yet, which just sounds really bad, because lots of people say the town centre is dead, and I just wondered, should that not be the priority? So that's the scheduling question. The other one is about how the risk that a business investment district that is funded, where the 20% is from the 10 largest, where lots of city centres are becoming homogenised, and they're all betting shops, and you've got loads of betting shops and loads of hair and nail places. And I'm just wondering, if you have these big businesses, big ones that dominate the town centre, or the current makeup of the town centre, the decision-making of that town council for the business investment district, how do you ensure that the smaller voices that are going to be setting up the smaller places that aren't paying the biggest amounts also have a voice that's equal to the big players, so that you don't get a cookie-cutter town centre?
Yeah, brilliant points. I guess in terms of the sequencing question, the issue with Basildon is 80% of the property ownership in Basildon is in the hands of around about 4 or 5 major developers. And in order for a business improvement district to work, you need to be in a positive and proactive relationship with those developers in such a way which delivers symbiotic benefits, i.e. the developer doesn't want to hear that you want them to come and join your party. I don't mean political party, I mean party, as in the or join your club in order for them to help you deliver benefits for you. There has to be mutually beneficial benefits that both parties are willing to ascribe to. And given that, I guess, that symbiosis has been probably not as acute in Basildon over the last few years than it has in Billericay and in Wickford, we've had to take a longer time to build the relationships and to build the collaboration, I think. And also, you know, the market has changed. You know, 2 years ago, development was a very difficult thing to do in Basildon because of global geopolitical issues of, you know, post-COVID inflation, Ukrainian war. You know, it was very difficult to get stuff happening for the development community. So I would say to you that I think the decision to keep warming the relationship but not go for the kind of marriage. We've been dating and we've been kind of talking a lot and collaborating. And I think that's starting to pay off fruit because we're starting to see things move in the town centre. The relationships are genuine symbiotic. The other thing that makes Basildon kind of interesting is around the existing structures around, we have, for example, BTCM as an interesting vehicle in the town centre, which in theory could notionally play a very positive role as being the bid company if we wanted it to be there. But at the moment, we're not clear on what that is. So we've got a little bit of work to do. You'll remember through some of the town centre vision work that we did previously, we've talked about ambassador boards, we've talked about reviewing BTCM and seeing how collectively as a group of stakeholders we might make that stuff work better for us. So be confident that those things have been going on, but it would have been probably inappropriate to spend the little amount of money. These things are costing us 30, 40 grand a year. It would have been inappropriate to spend that in year one before we'd done some of the kind of warming and the collaboration. So be confident that this year we've got that amount of money set aside in our budget. And one of the things that we're doing at the moment is developing a specification around what that consultant might come and do for us this year, together with those 4 or 5 key developers. The other thing that I think is really important is to remember that at the moment, a large number of the developers in the town centre are mitigating against rates. So lots of them are currently not paying any rates because they've soft stripped or, you know, they're waiting to bring the development back out of the ground again. So it's not an ideal time necessarily to go to them and say, would you consider, having 1 or 2% more on your existing rates when they're trying desperately to get their costs down in order to be able to get their development away. So I think, I understand the frustration, and I think you're right. The need is clearly more acute here, but the circumstances and the relationships and the situation was not, I think, right to spend that money then, and we needed to take a longer run at that. The point about Billericay is that we were able to take a short path to that because there was this commitment. And the other thing is that if we get Billericay away, I think it will actually also create a little bit of competitive tension that the other places have also got to get one as well, but also a little bit of positivity that actually somebody is doing something. I didn't say, but if it works, in theory, in Billericay, they could have about £200,000 to £300,000 per annum in order to invest in the town, giving you about a budget of £1 million over 5 years. In Wickford, it will be a slightly smaller one because the area is smaller and the number of businesses be about 80 grand, but it'll still give you £500,000 a year in order to invest in the town. So I think that's the first one. The risk of, homogenised, I agree with you. I think that again, part of the discussions around what are the challenges in each of the towns. An example in Billericay, one of the greatest challenges is that the town becomes hollowed out as more residential takes over the town, and residential development encroaches onto Radford Way, and some of the buildings and offices get converted to residential property. If that path continues, there'll be less people just by pure density who are actually in the town in the daytime. So there'll be less people spending money in the shop. So one of the things that I think the town team and the businesses recognise that they need to fight together in order to stop that encroachment of residential, and they need a strong voice to say, actually, think about the business community. They also, I think, are kind of quite keen to look at how they can work to protect their businesses and save their businesses, and also make sure trajectory of place doesn't become a homogenised? How do we help independent retailers? How do we help those kind of artisan, small businesses that might want to set up something that makes the town distinctively different than just a Me Too thing? So I think, that is something, and that's lots of the conversation that's going on in all of these towns at the moment.
Thanks, Chair. You briefly touched on this on the last questions, obviously this will create growth in the town centres and will be hopefully making money for everybody in the future. But in terms of actually rolling this out, doing the actual ballot, will the ballot be online or
People will get sent voting.
Okay. Yeah. So obviously that side of things will all cost money, and sort of the advertising campaigns to try and convince as many businesses as possible to vote for this. I mean, do we have a figure of how much this will all cost for both Billericay and Wickford, and in the future hopefully Basildon as well?
Yeah. So I think to answer your question around the voting, it is a physical voting exercise. And in terms of, I'll come to the costs in a minute. I think, there is, in my view, in lots of our economic development policy, lots of stuff that we're thinking about is how do we teach a man to fish rather than just give them a fish? And the business improvement district, to some extent, is teaching a man to fish, or teaching the people, or giving the people in the town the ability to come together and create the capacity in order to be able to demonstrate, more civic action and more pride. And that, I think, is probably more, I wouldn't say it's more important, because you can't do one without the other. In order for the community to come together in that way, you do need to give them a resource and a budget in order to come together. You need to kind of almost put the money on the table and say, how do you want to spend that? And they then feel empowered to make a decision. So for me, the really important bit about a business improvement district is growing the capacity of the community to work together. There are times where I've been in Wickford, I've taken somebody from a shop and I've walked them 3 doors down, and they don't know the person 3 doors down. They go to their shop, they open it up at 9 o'clock in the morning, they lock it at 5 o'clock, and they go home. And that's not an uncommon experience. So creating that network and creating that community, I think, is really important. Your issue in terms of costs is, I would estimate that we will probably end up spending about £45,000 in actual external funded work per business improvement district. And at the moment, £30,000 of that is funded from UK Shared Prosperity Fund money. But it is very much a sprat to catch a mackerel, in the sense that if £45,000 begets you £1 million worth of investment, I'd see that as a reasonably good return on investment. But more importantly, if you create some kind of legacy around a community that starts positively thinking about, this is my town, I'm going to make a difference to this town. I'll be really honest, I'll finish on this point, but one of the real problems that we have in Wickford, I think, is that a large proportion of the people who live in Wickford who work in Wickford don't necessarily live in Wickford. Whereas in Billericay, it's the complete opposite. You actually find that the civic pride piece comes because it is their town. When we walk the high streets of Wickford and we ask, where are you from, we get quite a lot of Ilford and Romfords and things like that. So, the reality is, how do you create that sense of place, and that important, that this is, somewhere that I care about, rather than somebody just, as I said, opening the shop at 9 a.m, extracting the value out of the town and repatriating the profits back to some North London borough. That's our biggest challenge, and I think that's what a business improvement district, if you can get it to work, has the ability to do, is to start getting people who work in that place to say, actually, this place is important to me.
Just one thing with regards to the plan, then something slightly outside it. You mentioned that there were, was it business ambassadors or champions, did you mention? And how do we have any of those at the moment? And what's the criteria for selecting them?
So yeah, The answer to your question is no, there are no business ambassadors in the sense of a business improvement district at the moment. What, if you remember, as part of the Basildon Town Centre growth vision, we had the consultants who came to us and told us that in Stevenage, what they did was they established a business ambassador board in order to sit over the town and to create a kind of public-private partnership in order to work together in order to improve the general direction of that town. Those consultants used the phrase a business ambassador board. And to answer your question, there is no business ambassador board in Basildon at the moment, and there is no governance structure for yet established, apart from BTCM, which is a legacy company, but there is no other governance structure in Basildon in order to take this forward. In the case of Billericay and Wickford, we did make a decision about how to structure the town teams, and in simple terms, we went to each one of the political institutions in each one of the towns, town, borough and county, and said, can you amongst yourselves nominate a member to come and sit on this town team group? And in the case of Wickford, colleagues nominated Councillor Morris, and we nominated Councillor Brockman in order to get balance in the political system and not become a political mechanism. And in the case of county, they nominated Councillor Ball and so on and so forth. Then in terms of how we recruited the private sector people, we went out and wore out shoe leather, knocking on doors, saying exactly what we're saying to everybody here, and people who were willing to give their time and money self-nominated. That, at this point in time, I would say to you, the problem with that is that it's probably not as balanced as it could be. You know, the chairman at the moment is also saying, well, actually, we're lacking a small retailer. We're lacking enough representation from the industrial estates. We need to improve our DE&I, and we need to reach out into, BME communities, or we need to get more women on the board. So I think that it's an evolutionary process, and what should happen probably in time is that the town team should probably consider how it runs an election and how it opens itself up to recruit people in a democratic way in order to represent that community. But in the early stages of the development, you're basically lucky if you get any help at all. So you actually take it where it's offered, if you know what I mean. But as it grows and develops, you develop more sophisticated models for making sure your governance is more balanced.
Okay. From what you've described about the business improvement district, it's obvious that it's a particular type of business that would fit that criteria. What about all the other businesses? There are different types of businesses within the borough, or that residents within the borough are part of or party of. And I'm wondering, how are we capturing the needs of those different businesses and meeting those needs? And we have, for instance, we have businesses we've got small micro business owners who maybe runs a market stall. We have people who work from home. Maybe they run their businesses from home, but serving the nation beyond Basildon. How do those other businesses get supported?
I'll try and be brief on this one because it's not a simple decision. In reality, there's an element of the service that we provide and that our partners provide, which is a universal service. So if anybody wants help and they want to ask for advice, they can phone up either us or they can phone up a local growth hub, and it's open to anybody. It's place agnostic, it's sector agnostic. It will go wherever, wherever people want it to go. It's a telephone and a web-based service. Clearly, with 8,700 businesses in Basildon Borough, it's very difficult for us to give everybody the same level of service. What I would say to you is that I think that at the moment we're doing some work on thinking about who you want to spend the most of your effort behind and where you want to direct that. And I think it's, from my perspective, it's interesting that having recently just looked at the business base of South Essex, if you take I think there are about 515 businesses over 50 employees. I'll need to check this number, but it's a piece of research that I've been doing recently. And that those 515 businesses employ 40% of the population of Basildon. So if in some senses, and that drives you more towards, I'm afraid, a larger business because you're looking at the totality of employee numbers. But we already have a service whereby we provide an account management service to around about 130 businesses in the borough who are the more larger strategic companies. And we're basically, give you an example, we've just relocated the finishing line and we've kept, and Iveco, we've just done the same. We've just kept 500 jobs in the borough because we knew they were coming to lease end. We were having conversation with them and then we found them other properties. So we do a lot of work as a team in order to sustain those large companies in the borough and look after them. But not everybody wants to work with us. Not everybody wants to work with the council, so we do our best. And that model is becoming more prevalent, and we're going to find Essex County Council developing that model, and we're going to find the other local authorities. And we've led the way in the delivery of that service, and they're now following us. The other thing that is a really interesting piece of research is by an organisation called Nesta, which is it's called the Vital 6%. And if you get a chance to Google it, it basically says that 6% of the business base generates 50% of the growth in jobs in time. And that 6% is largely those really high growth, high performance, can be small, can be dynamic, but they've got an innovative idea, they've got an approach to life which is catalytic. And we have a database where we are able to identify the companies that are going through 10%, 20% compound growth, those companies that are getting innovation grants, those companies that are winning innovation awards, and we look after them as well, and we make sure they're happy. So we look after that 6%, because if in 10 or 15 years' time they've created 50% of the overall growth in the borough, then that's important. Last one is probably the international firms, and the reason the international firms are important is because there's always the possibility they might do an intra-company transfer or they give us access to foreign direct investment. So we try and look after those companies that have got an international head office somewhere else, because the potential for them to then bring new investment into the borough is often quite high. Unfortunately, there are other sort of socio-demographic characteristics that you could employ, like, for example, and I'll finish on this point, one of the really interesting things around the data around Basildon is if you look at the startup community in Basildon over the last 4 or 5 years, and this is slightly a dubious methodology, but I have no other better way of doing it. A lot of the startup businesses in Basildon have come from sub-Saharan African, people with a sub-Saharan African heritage, either Ghanaian or Nigerian. And I think that's a really positive thing. So lots of the work that we're doing around startup activity is actually deliberately trying to address that DE&I agenda. We've got a lady called Imelda Fosu who did our pre-startup tech accelerator, and 80% of the population who came on that course were from BME communities. So I think, again, in the startup space, there's actually a really positive, and there's a really interesting report by an organisation called Hope Not Hate, which picks out Basildon, which says the growth of Basildon as a community has been fueled by its increasing and growing diversity. And that's a really positive thing. So I'm happy to share any of that with you. But I guess you can see there is a methodology about how we go about this, but it isn't always that easy to kind of justify it, because you do end up choosing where you put your resource, and some people don't always get as good a service as you might want, if you know what I mean.
Thank you. Any further questions, or are we all okay? Just picking up on that point, I think it's important that we engage with the business community, so we can actually hear what their feedback is, because a lot of the time is the council may have an impression of what it feels could be done, and that may be not aligned. And I think now it's like the sort of marriage, you're sort of going through the honeymoon period, particularly in Basildon, which is particularly pleasing to hear, as it's got a lot to offer. So if no one's got any further questions, I'm happy to move to the work programme. That's on page 51 for anyone scrolling, sort of going through the pages. Just on one point, Jim, as you're the only officer here, I had raised this previously, but it was just one point I wanted considered, which was just an issue that I picked up on, was when we're going through a planning process, and particularly consultations for planning, is that we get that sort of reply set in, because I know I've had some correspondence with the planning department after I sort of chewed their ear over this, is just that the process that we have for that needs to be much clearer in how residents can feel that they've been listened to. And if I was to suggest that, would that require a vote, or is it just a...
We can just, excuse me, suggest it.
Yeah, if the committee...
And have a consensus.
If the committee's okay with that, just to be clear, it's there's a particular issue in my patch, and I'm sorry, I don't want to mispronounce your last name, but as Davida had raised, particularly in your development with Sempra Homes, one of the issues I had was that the residents were writing to the planning department, but they were sort of met by a wall of silence. And what I'm raising now is just whether something needs to be sort of smartened up to make sure residents feel that they're listened to, and that they feel that the feedback, particularly on your point with the housing, is that they can see that there's been some form of outcome. And I think that's just what I wanted to bring, because this is the right committee to do it in, and I feel quite strongly on this point. So if the committee's happy with that, we can add that to the work programme, unless anyone wants to put their hand up for that. Are you okay with that?
What was the actual subject matter
It
that
was
you
just-
want added, so I can take it
Yeah.
back?
So when they send out planning consultations, it's just making sure that the details are correct of where residents can go to, and then when they do send correspondence, that they're actually sort of replied to, because some of the correspondence I'd seen with the planning department was sort of a one-way street, and I think particularly with the bid that we've learnt is that it's important to engage with the residents, because they're the direct sort of stakeholder and fund of council. So if we're happy with that inclusion, it's just generally notes and endorses. Would have to have a vote on that because it's got endorse on. Yeah. I'll just read. Yeah, please.
No, I just wonder whether the topic might be something around explanation of case management, of how the growth team and the how it does case management. Like, for example, I've talked about account management of large firms, depersonalising it and making it more a case management question about how do we respond to inquirers in relation to business inquiries or planning inquiries, just as a general overview about how the team does case management. It might seem that's a sensible way of including that on the work programme as a topic that's generic enough that we can explore what's good practice in communication, if you know what I mean.
Because what I think, well, what I'm perceiving is that we're talking about the process of engagement with residents on these particular planning procedures from start to finish. Because so if they've engaged and they sorry? Yeah, just to know, even if they've not engaged, at least there's something somewhere to put that result so that they know that that's out there somewhere. So it's not left in the air, and they're not sure if anything has been done about the process.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to accept Jim's, and it's important that as a council, we say on our website we want to be open and transparent, so I think we might as well follow what it says on the website, and that's something I feel strongly about, particularly with planning. So if we're happy with that, I'll just read the recommendation so those watching at home and those here are clear with what we're looking at, which is that the committee notes and endorses the items currently identified to carry forward to the 24-25 work programme and considers any further items that need to be added, which we've done. The committee notes the Cabinet 4 plan and identifies any items that fall within its remit that it wishes to consider. So can I take the... Please.
I would like to see an item on startups, because we're talking about the big businesses. If we're not nurturing small businesses, then, well, I don't know if the small businesses are supposed to become the big businesses eventually, but we need to. It's a sector that needs to be cared for, so we need to understand what's going on within that sector.
I'm happy for that to be included unless anyone objects to that proposal. Any further proposal before I sort of wrap it up? Okay. Just if I can just take that to the vote, all those for? Unanimous. Thank you very much. Okay, that concludes this meeting. Thank you very much for attending, everyone, and thank you for those watching at home. Have a good evening and safe travels home. Thank you.